Hello and welcome to another edition of Mailbag. What is Mailbag? Well, Mailbag is a feature of the channel where you guys leave lots of comments on the channel and I attempt to answer those comments, or if I can't answer those comments, I throw it out to you guys who have more knowledge on some of this stuff than I do. So let's get into the first mailbag of this session. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. Next comment question comes from the Death Beats official, my mate Gary, and he writes in response to the Roland U20 U220 close to Roland D70. Moog invested in VST business. And Gary writes, "Hello John mate, in regards to whether a real music hardware can survive in a world that leans towards software and VSTs, here's my opinion. There will always be real hardware. There are plenty of popular artists and producers who make music using a DAW who will only use sounds they have made with hardware synthesizers. The D&B drum and bass producer Blade Runner is a good example of this. There are other artists such as Dimension and Subfocus who work with VST synths but also love hardware synths and incorporate them into their music. This is how I work, as you know. Aside from that, I'm guessing there will also be a big market in terms of guys like yourself who are 100% hardware focused. So with all that in mind, I think the hardware synth is here to stay. Interestingly enough, Arturia have just released what seems to be a MIDI controller and synth combo, which can load VST synths. To me, that sounds too close to the Roland plug-out concept, as opposed to being a useful evolutionary step. What I'd like to see is if some kind of hardware that incorporates an onboard sequencer with the ability to run VST plugins and an external synth via USB in a simple to use environment that enables the user to create music that is in line with the current standards. In other words, an accessible solution that allows people to easily make music with hardware." I think you make your point well, Gary. And at the point of writing this, I'd just seen the Arturia release, and it seems to be a different flavour of the recently released Native Instruments Control, which allows you to basically load the various Native Instruments VSTs onto the keyboard and work offline. And now I think that's a cracking idea. I have to be honest and say, where you've got and it's a little bit smaller than an iPad, so probably a 9-inch or an 8-inch screen, which is actually perfectly functional, and you can load the VST and you get all the functionality of the VST on the screen that you would have got if you loaded the VST onto your computer. I think that's a really good idea. But when you go back to saying, wouldn't it be good if you could have, well, that was the Muse Receptor. All those years ago, that's what the Muse Receptor, the whole concept of the Muse Receptor was. You put your VSTs on the receptor, you configured it all up, and you let the receptor do the hardware. The only downside to the receptor was you didn't have a keyboard, but then you plugged a MIDI keyboard into it and away you went. You plugged a sequencer into it and away you went. So, it's kind of been there for a while. The other manufacturers are looking at it, but now they're kind of coming up with this, these synthesizers that effectively are running soft synths. I mean, synthesizers have been running software for years. I mean, let's be honest about this. So they have been running synthesizer software for years. But now, if you could go and get commercial software off the shelf, and you could load it onto your synthesizer without having to do anything to it, all of a sudden, I think you've got a groundbreaking piece of kit. I think probably the reason why it doesn't happen is somewhere down the line, I'm pretty sure you're going to break intellectual property rights, because somewhere down the line you've got to be able to hack the VST to make it work on your hardware. Not quite sure where we're going with that. I mean, the reason why the Contacts thing works is because Contact make the software, Contact make the VSTs, Contact make the keyboard. You know, no brainer. If Muse had gone down that route, I think Muse would have had an absolutely market-breaking piece of kit. I think Muse, for all the positives, the biggest negative with the Muse receptor was it was expensive. Anyway, that's my view on this. Next comment question comes from David Bone, and this was in response to Korg 01W doesn't have power on separate board, TR8S output on Roland MX1, a mailbag I did in May 2024. David writes, regarding the 01W, I've had to shelve it for the time being. So this is a repair project that he's been doing. I repaired some traces leading to the DRAM memory using the sequencer would cause it to crash. Unfortunately, it would appear that I've inadvertently applied too much heat for too long to one of the pins. Data sheet has restricted tolerances. I know I was over. Now the board won't boot. Oops. I get a fatal exception error. Trying to source these DRAMs is proving pretty tricky. They're 40-pin ZIPs. UT Source will ship them for a price. I was considering sketching up a conversion PCB to use standard SIMs. Exactly the same IC, though a different pin arrangement, and the soldering pin headers onto either side of the PCB. Beer mat calculation. This will fit the zip profile. Also, if it worked, could offer the possibility of it to experiment with larger memory sizes. Highly doubtful anything beyond the original size would work. Work in progress though. Now this sounds like a really interesting project. It's something I would probably tackle on something that was completely dead. In terms of putting bigger memory in there, I suspect the firmware is designed, to be honest, only address certain ranges of memory. And therefore, if you put something bigger in there, it might work, but you might not be able to use the extended memory because the firmware just can't address it. On the flip side, it just might not work because there's too much memory and the firmware just throws a OODA flip. So, but it would be interesting to understand where you get to, David, in the future.